Chapter 4. The Beauty That Bewitches the Soul. David Lynn's remark elicited a hearty laugh from Simon Dane. You don't know anything, do you? If I can bring the Plum Blossom Bandit to his end, I won't just gain recognition. I'll achieve unimaginable benefits. David replied, The benefits must be significant then. Simon's eyes gleamed with anticipation. 3 decades ago, when the Plum Blossom Bandit disappeared from the martial world, everyone thought he was dead. But 6 months ago, he reemerged, and within half a year, he orchestrated nearly 80 crimes, including the violation of the daughter of the Hua Shan sex master. David sighed. If I'm not mistaken, this man must be over 70 now. Even so, his actions remain vile. Simon nodded grimly. Since his return, no one with wealth or a beautiful family member has slept peacefully. After a pause, Simon continued, That's why over 90 prominent families have secretly formed an alliance. Whoever kills the Plum Blossom Bandit will receive a generous reward, collectively amassed from all those families, a fortune beyond imagination. David asked, So, this secret is not much of a secret anymore? Simon smirked. Indeed. On top of that, the woman recognized as the greatest beauty in the martial world has vowed to marry whoever rids the world of this bandit. David exhaled heavily. Wealth and beauty, both temptations that unsettle the heart. No wonder you're willing to abandon tranquility and dive into this chaos. It's no surprise you killed your wife for this. And now, perhaps it's my turn. Simon hesitated but then admitted, To be fair, killing you is regrettable. Yet, I have no other choice. David chuckled. And do you think it will be that easy to kill me? Simon opened his mouth but remained silent, staring at David as though seeking an answer. He finally laughed nervously. If you survive this long in a perilous world, it must mean killing you won't be simple. But given your current state... Suddenly, a booming laugh echoed from the doorway. Given his current state, why not judge whether he's truly poisoned first? Simon spun around. At the narrow kitchen entrance stood a man of average build, dressed in a simple green robe. His demeanor exuded calm elegance, but his face was unsettlingly cold, as though it were carved from ice. It was difficult to discern whether the face was real or a mask. The man walked in leisurely, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice carrying a hint of disdain. Anyone foolish enough to lace wine with poison is capable of even greater idiocy. Wouldn't you agree? His final words were directed at David. And as David met his gaze, he found the man's eyes oddly captivating. They seemed misplaced on such an emotionless face, like twin jewels embedded in a lifeless statue. David smiled faintly, playing tricks during a card game with a gambling demon, lacing wine with poison in the presence of a connoisseur, or praising another woman's beauty in front of your wife. Anyone who commits these 3 acts is bound to regret it. The man in green smirked coldly. Regret will come, but only when it's too late. Simon hesitated, his gaze flickering between the 2 men before grabbing the wine jug. He sniffed it, his face contorted in disbelief. David chuckled softly. No need to check. The wine is indeed poisoned. Simon stammered. Then why did you? David's eyes glimmered with mischief. Did you think I'd actually drink it? As someone who's practically married to wine, I can detect poison from its scent alone. That's one advantage of being a wine lover, something teetotalers will never understand. Still in shock, Simon dropped the jug, the thud echoing through the room. The man in green observed coolly. Looks like he regrets it now. Unfortunately, it's a little late. Simon roared in desperation and charged at the man in green, unleashing 3 powerful strikes. For a man like Simon, who had spent decades refining his martial skills, these punches were fearsome, capable of shattering stone or pulverizing bone. Yet the man in green barely moved. With a casual flick of his arm, he avoided Simon's attacks effortlessly. Before Simon could react, the man's open palm struck his face with a resounding slap. Simon collapsed with a guttural cry, landing heavily on the ground. When Simon staggered to his feet, half of his face had swollen grotesquely, his left eye almost completely obscured. The man in green adjusted his gloves and spoke with icy detachment. By rights, your death would be unjust. But my hands, well, they have a will of their own. Simon's remaining eye widened in terror as it fell upon the man's gloved hands. His voice trembled. Your hands. The gloves were made of green steel, their surface shimmering faintly. The eerie glow seemed to chill the very air around them. Simon whimpered. The emerald death hands. What have I done to deserve this fate? David Lynn, you are a good man. I beg you, end my life quickly. David remained silent, his gaze lingering on the green-gloved hands. With a light nudge of his foot, he pushed the broken spear towards Simon. Simon gripped the spear, his voice trembling with gratitude. Thank you, David Lynn. I won't forget this mercy. Summoning all his remaining strength, Simon plunged the spear into his throat. His blood spilled onto the floor, black as tar. David closed his eyes and sighed. They say the emerald death hands are the deadliest poison in the martial world. It seems the legend isn't an exaggeration. The man in green flexed his fingers. They say anyone touched by these hands would rather die than live. That, too, is no exaggeration. David's eyes sharpened. But you are not Emerald Death himself. The man in green raised an eyebrow. What makes you so sure? David smiled but didn't answer. The man chuckled faintly. I never intended to impersonate him, but sometimes people make assumptions. David interrupted. Emerald Death never had disciples. The man's eyes glinted with amusement. Who said I'm his disciple? If anything, he's unworthy of being mine. David raised an eyebrow. Oh! The man's smile widened. Do you doubt my words? David replied calmly. I'm not particularly interested in your history. The man's gaze sharpened. Then, are you interested in the golden silk armor? David remained silent, his fingers idly tracing the blade of his small knife. The man's lips curled into a sly smile. They say you never miss with your blade. Shall we see if that's true? David answered quietly. Many doubted it before. And now? The man asked. David's expression grew somber. They're no longer around to ask. The man in green laughed, a sound both jarring and haunting. I must admit, I'm tempted to test that reputation. David shook his head. I wouldn't recommend it. The man's laughter subsided. He glanced at the dead bodies scattered around the room. The golden silk armor. It's here, isn't it? David nodded. The man smirked. I don't fear you, but I've never been one to gamble with my life. David remarked, That's a wise habit. You do well to keep it. Their exchange continued, tense and unyielding, as they both weighed each other's intentions and capabilities, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Chapter 5. Night in the Snowstorm. David Lynn drained another cup of wine, but soon doubled over, coughing violently. Clutching his chest, he murmured to himself with a sorrowful tone, Leo, Emily, I don't blame you. No matter what others say, I can never blame you. I know you've done no wrong. Every mistake stems from my own doing. The faint sound of the kitchen door creaking open caught his attention. Emerging from the darkness was not so much a man, but a moving mound of flesh. This grotesque figure resembled a large, round boulder. His body was bloated, his stomach protruding like a drum. His head and torso were smeared with dirt and grime, and the stench of sourness and decay wafted ahead of him. A smell so overwhelming it was nauseating. He moved by crawling, as he had no legs, dragging himself across the ground with surprising agility for someone so grotesque. This was no ordinary man. He was a human oddity. David frowned slightly. If you're here for food, you've come to the wrong place, my friend. The strange man ignored him. Despite his disability, his movements were unnaturally swift. Pressing his hands against the ground, he propelled his massive body toward the stove and the large pot near it, where Hayden's corpse lay sprawled. David observed with mild surprise. "Are you here for the golden silk armor too?" The strange man didn't respond. Instead, with a flick of his hands, his body shot backward, like a shrimp leaping out of the water, landing near the stove in one swift motion. David's tone grew serious. "The knife in my hand doesn't kill the undeserving, but if you take one more step, you'll prove yourself deserving of death." Unfazed, the strange man continued crawling forward. With deft hands, he stripped the golden silk armor from Hayden's corpse. David remained seated, his small knife glinting in his hand. His gaze fixed intently on the man, his face betraying faint astonishment. The man cradled the armor in his hands and burst into laughter. When the heron and clam fight, the fisherman wins. "I can't believe the treasure has fallen into my hands." David's expression remained cold. "I'm still here. My knife is still here. Isn't your declaration a bit premature?" The man leaped forward again, his bloated body landing directly in front of David. He grinned, revealing teeth coated in yellowish grime. "The knife is in your hand. Why haven't you thrown it yet?" The famous flying dagger of David Lin, unerring in its aim. "Go on, throw it. I won't dodge." David chuckled. "I find you pitiful. I don't want to kill you." The man cackled in return. "Pitiful? Haha, you're just afraid to admit the truth. Shall I reveal it for you? Others may think you're unharmed, but I know you've been poisoned. You're calm, remarkably so, and that's why everyone fell for the ruse." David's expression flickered briefly. "Is that so?" The man's laughter grew louder. "I'm not fooled. The poison I used is neither visible nor scented. Not even the keenest nose could detect it." David stared at him for a moment before a faint smile crossed his lips. "You seem well informed." The man puffed out his chest. "Of course I am. It's my poison. Do you really think you can fool me?" David's face remained neutral, but the corners of his lips and eyes tightened imperceptibly. After a moment of silence, he sighed. "Today has been full of surprises, so many unexpected people and events. Perhaps my luck is unusually good today." The man sneered. "Don't you want to know who'll claim your life?" David responded calmly. "I'd be honored to learn." The man's grin widened. "You've heard of the 7 most despicable figures in the martial world, haven't you?" David exclaimed. "The 7 infamous scoundrels." The man laughed heartily. "Exactly, 7 people known for their wickedness. They don't excel in martial arts, but when it comes to poison, deception, and despicable schemes, they surpass everyone." David nodded. "And you're one of them?" The man didn't answer directly, but instead asked, "Among the 7 infamous scoundrels, who is considered the most despicable?" David replied, "That would be Blackheart Gentleman Hugh." The man clapped his hands, grinning widely. "Correct, but his full title is Blackheart Gentleman Hugh the Deceiver. A vile, untalented man who thrives on deceit. When it comes to poison, not even the notorious 5 Venoms child of Blissful Cavern can compare to him." David remarked, "You seem to know him quite well." The man burst into laughter. "Know him? I am him." David sighed, saying nothing. Hugh laughed. Surprised to find the so-called Blackheart gentleman reduced to this, David responded evenly. "For someone like you to deceive anyone, those women must have been blind." Hugh chuckled darkly. "You're wrong. The women I deceived weren't blind, and they were stunning. But when you're locked in a dungeon, fed only greasy slop without salt for 10 years, even a handsome man turns into this." David asked, "So, you were betrayed by Simon Dane and his wife?" Hugh hesitated before nodding. "I made the mistake of seducing a young wife and fathering a child with her. Simon Dane took pity on her, but when I tried to reclaim her, both of them turned on me." David raised an eyebrow. "And now you're here for revenge?" Hugh's laughter faded. "Perhaps. But first, let me savor your suffering." The poison will render you helpless soon. You'll sit here, feeling your life slip away, just as I did for 10 years. David's gaze grew distant. I've faced death many times. It holds no fear for me now. Hugh laughed maniacally. We'll see about that. He propelled himself toward the exit. Farewell, David Lynn. Enjoy your last moments. Outside, the sound of a horse's hooves echoed through the snow as Hugh vanished into the night. David remained seated, staring at the wine jug on the table. One jug was empty. The other remained half full. Lifting the remaining jug, he sniffed it lightly before muttering, "No scent, no color, truly exceptional poison." He took a sip and closed his eyes. The wine is excellent. A single sip is worth it. Why not indulge? One sip followed another until the jug was empty. David chuckled to himself. If I die, I won't regret it. After all, I'm already sharing this place with the dead. With great effort, he staggered to his feet and stepped outside. Following the faint traces left by Hugh's horse, he trudged through the snow. David pulled out a half-carved figure from his robe. Though unfinished, the wooden figure's eyes seemed alive, gazing back at him with quiet sorrow. David smiled faintly. Why look at me like that? I'm just a drunken fool, a wanderer without a home. Returning to Leo was the right choice. The mistake was mine. He lifted his knife, intending to complete the carving, but his strength failed him. Snow fell in heavy silence, the world growing colder and dimmer around him. As David slumped to the ground, his rasping coughs echoed into the snowy night. Through the wind, one name slipped from his lips. Emily, Emily. Somewhere in the distance, a burly coachman with a thick beard heard his master's faint cries. To be continued.